Rabbi Yosef.
How are you?
I'm alive and well and in Gullus. Baruch Hashem. From the Gullus Shleima.
So without any further ado, we proudly present to you someone whose name is Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who has a special connection to today. And he will add and Yitzchak, and he will do it with Simcha, and he will add Torah, mitzvahs, and achlotas, and Simcha, and that whole wonderful Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tamuz package, and Rabbi Paltiel, the covered Godel.
Shalom Aleichem. I got a lot of rectangles, gray rectangles with names on them. Everybody's hiding. Rabbi say, if we see your face, nothing's going to happen to you, I promise. Okay, I'm used to this. Okay, good evening, everybody. Shalom Aleichem. I'll drink a little wine. Don't call me an alcoholic. I'm drinking alone. Chaim Levracha. Chaim Levracha. Okay, so it's Yud Beis Yud Gimel Tamuz. Yud Gimel Tamuz, to be exact. Yesterday was Yud Beis Tamuz, and today is Yud Gimel Tamuz. So let's start from the beginning. Okay, let's start from the beginning. What's the beginning of the story of Yud Beis Tamuz? The beginning of the story of Yud Beis Tamuz, of course, that's when the Friedrich Rebbe was born. And there's a story about that. The story is that the Friedrich Rebbe's parents had gotten married some 5 years before the Rebbe Rayatz was born. And the Friedrich Rebbe's mother, whose name was Rebbe Sara, kept losing her pregnancies. And it was very hard for her. It was very, very hard for her because what had happened was, I mean, you have to understand, when they got married, they were 14. They were children. The shidduch was made when they were 4-year-olds. The Tzemach Tzedek signed on their tnoim. The Rebbe Rashab was 4 years old when him and his future wife were engaged. They were first cousins. This is very holy people. Regular people cannot do that. Only in these families could these kinds of things work. This is a holy brother, two holy brothers marrying off their holy children to one another. The shidduch was made when they were children. They got married at 14. And the deal was, I'm not going into the politics, the deal was that the chasana took place in the city where the Kala grew up. And right after Sheva Brachas, they came to Lubavitch. Because the Rebbe Rashab needed his father. The Rebbe Rashab needed his father for pneumistic reasons. For Avodah, for Torah, for Yiddishkeit, so the Rebbe Sara was away from home at a very early age. Now, of course, the tradition normally was, when a boy and a girl got married, they literally moved into the girl's parents' home. I mean, going back not so long ago, it wasn't like today you got an apartment with furniture and everything like that. You got a bedroom. A couple got married, they moved into the girl's family, and they lived there sometimes for years. And the first children of the new couple were basically raised by their grandmother, who was teaching a young girl how to be a wife and a mother. That's how it was. And it would be nice if it could still be. Today that would last about 2 seconds. There'd be so much politics, the Welt wird untergehen. But they got married very little, and they would move into their parents' home. But because the Rebbe Rashab needed the Rebbe Marash, needed his father, so the Rebbe Sara had to be separated from her family at an early age. And if she had had children, she would have been busy at least. It was very, very hard for her. It was very difficult for her. In addition, it says that she was very short. The Rebbe Sara was short, like the Rebbe Chaim Mushka was short. And everybody in the Rebbe's house was tall. They were all very tall. And she was very self-conscious about that also. So her father-in-law, the Rebbe Marash, once saw her and saw that she was in a particularly self-conscious mood. So he said to her, Kleine Bäume geben gute Frucht. That small trees give the best fruit. When that's the way it turned out, her son was the Friedrich Rebbe. Anyway, the story is this, that Simchas Torah, Tafresh Mem, the year that Friedrich Rebbe was born, she went to shul. And of course, Simchas Torah, the women basically come into the men's shul. They take down the mechitza for the hakafas and so on. And she was watching all of the young mothers with their children, and she was alone. So she started to cry. When she started crying, she fell asleep in shul. And she had a dream. And in her dream, she basically saw a number of people. I don't remember whether it says the names of the people in the dream, but I certainly don't remember their names. And they told her that she should give 24 ruble to tzedakah, and she'll have a special son. And by the way, there's an identical story one generation earlier, that Rebbe Tzedivka had a dream that she should write a Sefer Torah, and then the Rebbe Rashab was born, and the Rebbe Tishtan Asada had a dream that she should give 24 ruble to tzedakah and she'll have a special son. Anyway, she woke up and she's in shul. Right? Later that afternoon, the Rebbe Rashab came home from shul. It was Simchas Torah, and it was in a Simchas Torah mood. So instead of walking into the house, he somersaulted into the house. He cartwheeled into the house, full of simcha. The Rebbe Rashab was how old? Tafresh Mem, he was not yet 19. And he stands up and he looks at his wife, and she doesn't look very Simchas Torah. She looks incredibly earnest. And he says to her, "Why do you look so earnest?" So she tells him, "I had this very unusual dream." And she describes the dream to her husband, the Rebbe Rashab. And the Rebbe Rashab immediately went to his father, the Rebbe Marash, repeated the dream, and probably the Rebbe Marash called her, and she had to repeat the dream. And he probably figured out who were the people that she saw in the dream. She didn't recognize them, and each one's message and so on. And the bottom line is, she had no money. What she had was a footer. She had a fur. She had a fur that was one of the things that standard Kalas got to the Chasaneh. She pawned this fur, and she got herself 24 ruble, and she gave it to tzedakah. And that year, the Frierdiker was born. The Rebbe Tzedakah Sada, you would tell the story, and then she would say, Yenem yor zer geboren geworden. That year, the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker was born that year, Yud Bis Tamuz. So he was born Yud Bis Tamuz, so his bris was on Yud Tes Tamuz. 8 days later, the Frierdiker was bris. So it's, of course, this is a very famous story that his sandik was his grandfather. His sandik was the Rebbe Marash. He was named after his maternal grandfather. The Rebbe Shteiner's father had already passed away. Rabbi Yitzchak had passed away. And the Rebbe Marash, his paternal grandfather, was the Sandik. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said, by my bris, I cried like all children cry. So the Zayda, the Rebbe Marash, who was holding me, said, Was weinst du? Als du wirst auswachsen, wirst du sein ein Rebbe, und du wirst sagen, Chassidus besofa berura. Why are you crying? When you grow up, you're going to be a Rebbe, and you speak Chassidus clearly. In other words, don't cry. You're destined for greatness. This is the story of the Frierdiker Rebbe's. This is the first Yud Beis Tammuz, the Frierdiker Rebbe's birth. The second Yud Beis Tammuz is the Frierdiker Rebbe's 15th birthday. This is a fascinating story. It's a very fascinating story, and it's fascinating because you ask yourself, why did the Rebbe Rashab do this? And the background to the story is as follows. Frierdiker was a child, and like all other children, he went to Cheder. He had a Malamed. The Frierdiker had 3 Malamdim. I'm not going to tell you a story about the Malamdim because we don't have all night. And by the way, in case anybody here, Chas v'Sholom Hoyles here, does not know about my website, please write down insidechassidus.org. I beg you, please visit me, and you can listen to stories on Frierdiker Rebbe for a whole night. InsideChassidus.org. Please visit. He had 3 Malamed. His first Malamed was Rabbi Kasil Malamed. He taught him how to Pashat read. Then he had a Malamed whose name was Reb Shimshon. Frierdiker said he was a good teacher, but he was an angry man, and whenever he had to put the fear of God into the children, he would hit me. Because Frierdiker said the kids knew that if he could hit me, he could hit any of them. And he used to say, Bamir zaynetokim yuchosim. The Shimshon the Malamed, you say, there's no privileged characters. He was the Rebbe's son, and when he didn't behave, he gave him clap. Then he had the Reb Nissen. The Nissen Skabla was his third Malamed. The Nissen was a Chassid, and Nissen would tell stories. And Reb Nissen's worst punishment, Nissen had on the wall a pas, had on the wall a belt hung on the wall. The worst punishment he ever handed out was he would point at the belt. He never took it off the wall, just pointed at it. It was a whole different kind of Malamed. After his 3 Malamdim, he was probably 11. He was taken out of the Cheder, and he was given to a private tutor. The Frierdiker Rebbe was given private tutoring by a very great chassid, whose name was the Rashbatz, Reb Shmuel Betzalel Sheptel. The story about the Rashbatz was that he had been the Frierdiker Rebbe's father's tutor. He was hired by the Rebbe Marash to tutor the Rebbe Rashab, and then later his former pupil hired him to tutor his son. In other words, the Rashbatz had the incredible distinction of being the madrich, of being the malamed of two Rebbes, two of the Chabad Rebbes. So you can imagine Bas Fara'id who the Rashbatz was. Anyway, so he was given to the Rashbatz was his tutor, and they would learn together for a few years. I think the tutelage continued even after the Frierdiker Rebbe got married. He was still under the Rashbatz's watch. But for a number of years, they would push a room together. They were roommates. And the Rashbatz's chinuch was 24 hours a day. It wasn't just that they sat for a few hours and learned. He taught him how to wash negelvaser and so on, everything. They were very close. And of course, the story was, the Schneerson part of the story is, that the Rashbatz opened up a Tanya and he wanted to teach the Frierdiker Rebbe Tanya. And the Frierdiker Rebbe says, oh, no. Tanya lern ich nur von Tanya. Tanya, I'm going to learn only from my father. So the Rashbatz said, I taught your father Tanya. I taught your father Tanya. He says, I don't care what you did and who you did it to. My father's teaching me Tanya and I'm not learning. So the Rashbatz went to the Rebbe Rashab and he complained that your son is not behaving. I want to teach him Tanya. He's going to learn from me. So the Rebbe Rashab called him and he tried to reason with the Frierdiker Rebbe. The Frierdiker Rebbe's last name was Schneerson, which equals stubborn. And the Rebbe said, if you're not going to teach me Tanya, I'm not learning Tanya. So the Rebbe Rashab made a schedule to learn Tanya with the Rebbe Rayatz. Many, many years later, the Rebbe Rashab said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, I thank you. I thank you for not learning Tanya from anybody but from me. The Rebbe Rashab recognized after the fact that it was a good thing. Anyway, at a certain point, maybe when he was around 13, the Rebbe Rashab told his Rebbetzin, he told the Rebbetzin, Steine Sora, ich hab machle gewesen, als mit sein Chinuch darf ich sich allein abgeben. He had sent him to school. They sent him to a private tutor, the Rebbe Rashab did. And he told his wife, I decided I have to personally raise him. I have to get involved in the Frierdiker Rebbe's chinuch personally. And probably from the age of 13 or 14 onwards, the Rebbe Rashab spent time with the Frierdiker Rebbe being madrich, teaching him Torah, teaching him Avodah, and so on. And one of the things that they did was they would take very, very long vacations, summer vacations. The Rebbeim of Chabad, used to go to Dacha. They went away on vacation. They went to the Dacha meant to the field. Lubavitch was a big city. Lubavitch is a hole in the wall. I visited Lubavitch. There's nothing happening in Lubavitch. The Dacha was even smaller than Lubavitch. It was very private. There was nobody around. And the Rebbe Rashab and the Frierdiker Rebbe would take long walks. And the reason they did this is because they didn't want people to know how much attention the Rebbe was giving to his son. And they would leave after Shavuos and they'd come back for Chayel. They lived literally away 3.5 months from Lubavitch. And the Frierdiker Rebbe spent a lot of time, private time, with his father, with the Rebbe Rashab. And the custom was every Monday they came to Lubavitch. Every Monday they traveled to Lubavitch. Why? Number one, because the Rebbe Rashab had a custom to go into his mother every Monday for Kibbud Avim. He would go into his mother, he would boil up a chaynik of water, and she would sit and he would serve her. This was his ritual once a week. Our Rebbe did it every day. The Rebbe Rashab did it every week. Mondays he would go into his mother and he would sit with her and he would honor her. And she would invite guests. So it was like a shtickle Farbrengen around this cup of tea. When the Rebbe Rashab was away from Lubavitch, sometimes when he was out of the country, he would come back to Lubavitch just to serve his mother a glass of tea and then leave, go back to wherever he was. So when he was in Dacha, every Monday he came to Lubavitch. Monday was Yer Aleph Tamuz, the day before the Frierdiker Rebbe's birthday. So they came to Lubavitch, he went into his mother, then of course he would look at the mail, the Rebbe Rashab would look at the mail, and he also took people to Yechidus. This is what he did when he came to Lubavitch on Monday. On the way back to the Dacha, the Rebbe Rashab says to the Frierdiker Rebbe, tomorrow morning you have to daven very early. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, what's the rush? He says, because we're going to Lubavitch. So the Frierdiker Rebbe says, we were there yesterday. Wrong again. And especially if we're going to show up in Lubavitch unannounced, the mama shrekin, your mother is going to be afraid that the Baba, he never said the Baba, shrekin, they were coming without a scheduled visit. So the Rebbe Rashab said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, the Baba weiß schon von them. Your grandmother knows that I'm coming tomorrow with you to Lubavitch. Anyway, the next day, which was the Friedrich Rebbe's birthday, Yud Beis Tammuz, it was his 15th birthday, Tafresh Nun Hey, 1895. They davened early, they came to Lubavitch, and they went to the Oil. And the Rebbe Rashab took the Friedrich, he was a 15-year-old boy. The Rebbe Rashab took the Friedrich Rebbe into the oil of his father and his grandfather, the Rebbe Manash and the Rebbe Tzemach Tzedek. And there's this detailed description of what happened by the oil. But the essence of it was that the Rebbe Rashab turned to his son, his 15-year-old son, and he said to him, Ich nehm dich to the Akedah. I'm taking you to the Akedah, like Avraham took Yitzchak to the Akedah. I'm binding you. And he says, I'm making with you a covenant, a krisis bris, from this day forward, that you are going to be my right hand in all matters of public service, of askanas tziburis. And he told him, amongst other things, for askanas tziburis dafen haben mesiras nefesh, to serve the Jewish people, to be a servant to the Jewish people, you have to be ready to sacrifice your life. And then the Rebbe Rashab explained, Du weißt, was meint mesiras nefesh? You know what mesiras nefesh means? Mesiras nefesh meant azoy und nicht anders. Mesiras nefesh means so, like this and no different. There's no room for compromise. So the Friedrich Rebbe's private life ended when he was 15. Okay? Bichlal the Lubavitcher Rebbeim, before they were a Rebbe, they were isolated. They were learning. They were davening. They were not very involved in stuff. And the truth is, the Rebbe Marash also became involved in Askanas at a very young age. But the Friedrich Rebbe became a servant to the Jewish people at 15 years old, and he served the Jewish people for 55 years. It's literally true, because from that point forward, everything that Rebbe Rash, for the next 25 years, he served the Jewish people underneath his father's counsel. And for the 30 years after that, he was Pasha to Rosh B'nai Yisrael, he was the Nasi Yisrael, he was the Rebbe. Now, why did Rebbe Rashab did this? Why did the Rebbe Rashab take a 15-year-old Bacher and basically, steal his youth? Most people at 15, the Friedrich Rebbe at 15 was like you at 500. But nevertheless, why did he have to take such a young boy and give him so much responsibility? And the Friedrich Rebbe describes every one of the activities that the Rebbe Rashab was involved with. And there were a lot of tzaddas in Russia, and there were a lot of things that needed to be addressed. The Friedrich Rebbe was the Rebbe Rashab's right-hand man. He says, I knew my father's handwriting. Friedrich Rebbe writes, I would oftentimes write letters for my father in my father's handwriting, and my father would sign them. There's a famous story that the Rebbe Rayatz was about 15 or 16 years old. He went to a meeting of the biggest Rabbanim in Russia. The Chafetz Chaim was there, the Chaim Brisker, the G'dolim of Russia, and the Rebbe Rayatz was a 15, 16-year-old Bacharel. He barely had a hair on a chin, so they sent along an old chassid. They sent along a beard. Who was the beard? The beard was the Rashbatz, this tutor that I told you about, who had been a chassid from Tzemach Tzedek. He was the tutor of the Rebbe Rashab, then he was the tutor of the Rebbe Rayatz. He sent him along. So there should be a beard. Lubavitch should have a beard. Basically. Right before they left Lubavitch, the Rebbe Rashab called him the Rashbatz. And he said to him, Du sollst wissen, als ich schicke, und was wenige, du wirst sich mischen als best. So I want you to know that I'm sending him. He's talking 15, 16 years old, but him I trust. And the Rashbatz was a Yid ben Shivim, was 70 years old. And the less you get involved, the better it'll be. So in other words, the Rebbe Rashab knew who the Friedrich Rebbe was. And he understood that the Friedrich Rebbe at that tender age was in a position to be involved in Askanas on a global level with incredible responsibility. And I came on, I watched the tail end of that story. That's from Yud Beis Tammuz Tashmim Hey, right? The story where the Rebbe Rayatz went into an office building and he took a document and he signed it and he sealed it, he put it in another pile and walked out. This was the kind of, in Yonim, that the Friedrich was involved. Do you know the Friedrich Rebbe did such reckless things when his father was alive yet, that elder Chassidim went into the Rebbe Rashab and they told the Rebbe Rashab, you can't do this to your son. You're putting him in positions where he has to risk his life over and over again. And Chas v'Sholem, one time it's not going to work out well, because the Rebbe Rashab sent him on missions that were very dangerous, not once or twice, repeatedly. And the Rebbe Rashab said, no. For Askanas Tziburis, you have to have Mesiras Nefesh. And he said the famous words, Muftachani azevet marach yomim zayin. I know for sure that he will live long. The Friedrich Rebbe lived 70 years. The Rebbe said once that the last 17 years of his life, the doctors were saying that there's no explanation in medicine how he lived. But the Rebbe Rashab had said when he was a young man yet, Muftachani azevet Meirachem. The Rebbe Rashab was all over the world. Friedrich Rebbe, I'm sorry, for his father. And it started when he was 15. At 15, he became a servant of the Jewish people, and this is really true. And he served the Jewish people with incredible self-sacrifice for 55 years. The next Yud Beis Tammuz is this following. The Friedrich Rebbe's father, the Rebbe Rashab, had a custom that all the Lubavitcher Rabbeim had. And the custom was that if their birthday was not on Shabbos, if birthday was during the week, they would celebrate their birthday in private. In other words, in those days, it wasn't like now that we all celebrate our Yom Huledes, our birthdays. In those days, there wasn't such a custom yet. So the Rabbeim used to say Chassidus privately. Nobody knew about it except the people who were invited. So the Rebbe Rashab's custom was that whenever his birthday was not Shabbos, he would say Chassidus privately for the Friedrich Rebbe. He would say Chassidus privately for the Friedrich Rebbe. A Kitzer, in Tafresh Pei, the year that the Rebbe Rashab passed away, the Rebbe Rashab said a Maimer Chassidus in private, to the Friedrich Rebbe privately. And after he finished saying the Maimer Chassidus, the Rebbe Rashab turned to the Friedrich Rebbe, to his son, and he said to him, I'm giving you a bracha that you should be zeicha to say Chassidus on your birthday. So the Friedrich Rebbe said to his father, Bitnai, as I'll agree to say Chassidus on my birthday on the condition that it'll be with kindness and compassion. Because what the Rebbe Rashab was really telling him, that you're going to be a Rebbe and you'll say Chassidus on your birthday. And the Friedrich Rebbe says, I'm agreeing to be a Rebbe on one condition. And the condition is that I'm going to see good in Chassidim. I'm going to see only good in Chassidim. And this is the meaning of the words Bechesed Barachim, that I'm going to see only good in Chassidim. And you should know that when our Rebbe became a Rebbe, in Tafshin Av, the first Farbrengen, the Rebbe said in 1951, when the Rebbe fished with Makabel the Nesias, in that maiden Farbrengen, that first Farbrengen, at the end of the Farbrengen, you could look it up and see it inside, the Rebbe said, our Rebbe said, it's in the Kutasichas Chelik Beis, in the Hisofis of Yud Shvat. He says that the Friedrich Rebbe, when his father spoke to him about Nesias, he took out a condition with his father, that his Nesias, his Rebbeship, should be with kindness and compassion. And the Rebbe indicated that he's making the same condition, that the condition of his being a Rebbe is that he's only going to see good in people, he's not going to see bad in people. So the Friedrich Rebbe finishes, it took 7 years. In other words, the Friedrich Rebbe became a Rebbe in 1920. In 1927, on his birthday, the Friedrich Rebbe was, of course, released from prison. So his birthday became a Chag HaGeula, became a Yom Tov. And as a result of this, the Friedrich Rebbe was able to say Chassidus publicly in a very overt way on his Yom Huledes, because it wasn't only his birthday, it was also the Chag HaGeula. That's another Yud Beis Tammuz of note. And of course, the last Yud Beis Tammuz of note is Tafresh Pei Zayin, 1927, when the Friedrich Rebbe was released from prison. Now, I'm sure people have had the opportunity to read or to hear some of the story of Yud Beis Tammuz, but I don't think our imagination is sophisticated enough, is strong enough to appreciate the recklessness, that's the right word, the recklessness with which the Friedrich Rebbe did his work in the Soviet Union. When the Friedrich Rebbe became a Rebbe, in the very, very beginning, he continued to do what his father used to do. He said Chassidus, he was strengthening the yeshivas Teimchet Mimim and other such things. And then with 2 or 3 years, he realized that all the Rabbanim had left Russia, all the Rosh Yeshivas, all the Gedei Yisrael ran away from Russia, and there was a huge vacuum. And the Friedrich Rebbe realized that if he doesn't do anything, there's no leadership. And the Friedrich Rebbe undertook to replace all the positions of all the leaders who had left the country. And he used his people, his students, his Talmidim, the Tmimim. And the Friedrich Rebbe was unbelievably organized and successful in offsetting the losses on the the field of Jewish leadership in Russia using his own Talmidim. And of course, many of them went to Siberia, and a significant number of those, Nebuch, in one way or another, Pasha did not come back from Siberia. I mean, the stories are well known. But the Frierdiker Rebbe personally, the Frierdiker Rebbe himself, was so reckless about his Mesiras Nefesh, the way he literally threw away his own life for Yiddishkeit in Russia was wild. It was crazy. You could see in the Siches, in the Frierdiker Rebbe's talks, the public talks that he gave at that time, that the Frierdiker Rebbe would tell stories about the Moranos and about the Masai Satzlov, about the Crusades. He would talk to the Hasidim in his Farbrengens, telling stories, historic stories about the Inyan of Mesiras Nefesh, rallying Hasidim for the Inyan of Mesiras Nefesh. And of course, the Mesiras Nefesh of the Frierdiker Rebbe had many aspects, but the aspect which stood out the most and probably got him into the most trouble was the chinuch of little children. The Frierdiker Rebbe, besides for the fact that he was Moisei Nefesh for Rabbonim and for Shchita and for mikveh tara, for sure, mikveh, he was Moisei Nefesh for chinuch al taras for Yiddish kinder. They shouldn't go to the treifa schools, they should learn in a cheder, they should learn Kometz Alafah and Siddur and Chumash and Mishnah and Gemara and so on. For this, the Mesiras Nefesh that he had for this was unbelievable. And understand, Yamach Shmoi Stalin and this Lahavl and Lahavl, Yamach Shmoi Hitler, they shared this property. Both of them understood that if they want to conquer Russia, all they need to do is brainwash the children. So in Russia they had what was called the Komsomol, and in Germany they had what was called the Hitler Youth. It's the same principle. They took the children, and if you would join the Komsomol, if you would join the red, right, the Kresnaya, that you would get one of those red bandanas. I know all about you guy in Crown Heights. He told me himself that he went to one of these parties, he went to one of these evenings, and he came back with a red bandana, and his father tore it off him. He says, "You're not going to..." They made joining these youth movements very attractive, and they would brainwash the children. And the Stalin, Yamach Shemei v'Zechrei, all of his evil, understood the principle of Ein Gedoyim Ein Tyoshim. If he can brainwash the children, he has to wait a few years, and Russia's his. And that's exactly what happened. He put so much effort into education and so much effort into the extracurricular activities of children, and the entire focus was a systematic and organized brainwashing in the communist way. They tore God out of people's minds. They tore God out of people's hearts. They tore God even out of people's souls, Rahman al-Islam. And they did it very effectively. And the Frierdiker Rebbe knew the same thing that Stalin knew, but he had from a different source, that the future of the Jewish people is kinder. When the Eibishter gave us the Torah, the condition was that our children are going to represent us. The future of the Jewish people depends on the children. So Stalin wants the children, the Frierdiker Rebbe wants the children, and that was a huge impasse. The Stalin Yamach Shmei said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, not in words, "You can have all the old people. Fill up your shuls without the light. I don't mind. I don't want to see a child in shul." And the Frierdiker Rebbe said, "I want the children in shul." And for this, he was ready to give his life, mamish, literally. And like I said before, he was reckless in his Mesiras Nefesh. The Frierdiker Rebbe has a letter where he describes Purim Tafresh Pezayin, the Purim of the year of his arrest, which was exactly 3 months prior to his arrest. Purim Taf Reish Pezayin. And he writes, the Frierdiker Rebbe says that he doesn't even remember everything that happened. That at one point, he tore open his shirt. The Frierdiker Rebbe tore open his shirt, and he pointed at his bare chest, and he said, "As wird sehen, der Guf brennt, sollte nicht aufhören lernen mit Hashbar." Which means you'll see this body burning. Don't stop teaching the children. Don't stop teaching the children. Now, of course, you all are big Talmidei Chachamim. Today, everybody's a scholar. There's nobody that's ignorant. And you know that children are part of a mitzvahs. Children are part of a mitzvahs. There's a mitzvah to teach children Torah, but chinuch is midrabanan, and children are part of it. Why are you Meisei Nefesh for teaching children? You have to be Meisei Nefesh for Avodah Zarah, for Gilui Arayos, for Shvichas Dama. Why are you being Meisei Nefesh for children? So of course you have the famous Gemara. It's a Gemara that Rabbi Akiva said That if the fish is in the water, it has a chance of surviving, even though the fishermen are trying to catch it. If the fish comes out of the water, it's going to die certainly. If a Yid learns Torah, there's a possibility he survives. If a Yid doesn't learn Torah, there's absolutely no future. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was Meiseh Nefesh V'Chinuch Al Taras HaKiddush for children. And they got him. Yeah, they finally got him. They arrested him. Tesvav Sivan Tov Reish Pezayin. They came at 2:30 in the morning. That was their tradition. They woke you up and they try to rattle you. 2:30 in the morning, they came to Frierdiker Rebbe's house and he made a lot of noise. Now the Frierdiker Rebbe was wide awake because the Frierdiker Rebbe had been sitting in Yechidus. That night he was seeing people. And the last of the people he had seen had just left. And now the Frierdiker Rebbe said, I went into the kitchen, the dinette, to eat. He was hungry, to eat something. It was mamish the middle of the night, and there was a knocking on the door, pounding on the door. And he opened the door, and of course he had Lulav and Nachmanson. Lulav and Nachmanson were both descendants of Hasidim Kipshute. One of them said to the Frierdiker Rebbe, my grandfather carried the bag for your grandfather. Let me carry the bag for you. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said to him, your grandfather went where my grandfather led. You're taking me where I don't want to go. I'll carry my own bag. The Frierdiker Rebbe told. They were Jews, and of course the schar, the reward that they got for being such good communists, was that just a few years later, both of them were shot by Stalin, as was the tradition over and over again in Soviet Russia at the time. Nachmanson and Lulav came in half a dozen soldiers. They stood by every door with a bayonet and a rifle. And they said the policy was anybody who wants to come in can come in, nobody could leave. And they went into every room and they turned it upside down. And the Frierdiker Rebbe said to them, my mother is asleep. I promise you don't want to wake her up. Because if my mother wakes up, you're going to have your hands full. Anyway, they didn't keep quiet. They made noise and they woke up the Frierdiker Rebbe's mother. The Rebbe Shtender, she came out of her bedroom and she saw what was going on and she had a meltdown. She became hysterical. And she started calling to her late husband, the Rebbe Rashab, who had passed away 7 years before. Look where they're taking my son, the tzaddik. And she shouted, take me, don't take my son, the tzaddik. The Rebbe Shtender, she was very protective of her son. And it became very hysterical. So the Frierdiker Rebbe turned to these people who had come to arrest him at 3 o'clock in the morning and says, can I quiet her down? Can I go into the room, try and calm her down? So they made the mistake of letting him do that, and that was a great miracle. Because I assure you, when the Rebbe closed the door, all of a sudden his mother wasn't hysterical anymore. And he was able to give her instructions that were very useful in sparing the Rebbe more difficulties than he already had. Anyway, they ransacked the house, they turned it upside down, and they took him away. And there's all kinds of details to the story. I'm not going to tell you the whole of the Shemus HaMaaseh. You could read the story, it's printed and translated into English. But these are some of the stories that happened that night, Tezvav Sivan. And the Frierdiker Rebbe wrote an essay called the Shemus HaMaaseh, the essay of his arrest. We only have the beginning of it. I don't know if he ever finished it. We have several hundred pages, and it accounts for the first 36 hours or 48 hours. And he was planning on writing more, but he never finished the Shemus HaMaaseh. He only started it. Anyway, the Rebbe spent 18 days in prison. Of course, the original plan was to shoot him. When they brought the Frierdiker Rebbe in, the plan was to shoot him that night. And of course, the famous story, the great miracle was that the Frierdiker Rebbe was told to go to a certain room. Had he walked through that door, they would have shot him on the spot. But they didn't tell him what time he has to get into that room. So he decided to take a smoke. So the Rebbe found a bench in the Shpalerika prison in the hallway, and he sat down to smoke a cigarette. He'll get to room 60 whenever he gets there. Nobody told him to rush. And as he's smoking a cigarette, the door opens and a man walks out and he spots the Frierdiker Rebbe, and he knew who he was. And he asked him why he was here, and he told him that he was told to go to this and this room. He said, that's impossible. There's no way he told you to go to that door, because he knew exactly what's behind that door. And he says to wait. He told the Frierdiker Rebbe to wait, and that's how the Frierdiker Rebbe's life was saved. That's how the Frierdiker Rebbe's life was saved. He spent 18 days in the Shpalerika prison. And I'm not going to talk you through all the details of what happened in the Shpalerika prison, but this I want you to know. The Rebbe Rayatz was beaten brutally. The Frierdiker Rebbe was beaten brutally over and over again during those 18 and a half days in jail. because the philosophy was, the policy was, the idea was that you have to break the will of a prisoner. If you break the will of a prisoner, then they'll make confessions and they'll give you information. The Frierdiker Rebbe's will was unbreakable. So they kept on beating on his body, thinking that if they'll beat on his body enough, they'll break his soul as well. But the soul was unbreakable. So they kept on beating him and beating him. The Frierdiker Rebbe got so many beatings, it's unbelievable. Anyway, the end of the story was, of course, the famous story that the Frierdiker Rebbe said once, that he looked over at the sheet, at the page of the cross-examiner in front of him. He said there was something written and then it was crossed out. And what was written there was Gzar Din Mavis. It was written that they're going to shoot him. But the Frierdiker Rebbe didn't want to say those words because of Al Tiftach Pel HaSatan, you're not supposed to say bad words about yourself. And then it said a second line, 10 years of slave labor in Solovki, and that was crossed out. And then in the third line it said Gimel Shneis Meiser in Kastrama, 3 years of exile in the city of Kastrama. And after 18 and a half days in jail, of course you all know the story, they wanted him to leave before Shabbos. And he said that he's not traveling on Shabbos. So he spent 2 more days in prison. And on Sunday, which happened to be Gimel Tammuz, the Rebbe Rayatz left Peterburg, he left Leningrad, he left the Shpalerka prison, and he went off to Kostroma for 3 years of exile. The 3 years of exile lasted a grand total of 10 days, 9 days, 11 days, whatever the case is. The Seder was Azoy. He came to Kostroma whenever he came there, and he of course had to register. And once a week, he had to go into the office and register that he hasn't left the city. And if I'm not mistaken, that day was Wednesday. Wednesday morning, every single Wednesday, the Frierdiker Rebbe had to go in and register because Wednesday in Russia at that time was the beginning of the work week. A kid said, so he went the first Wednesday and he registered. The next Tuesday, the Frierdiker Rebbe was walking in the street. He was taking a spatzer, he was walking in the street with one of his Hasidim, and he met somebody from the office, from the KGB office. And he said to him, listen, today the offices are closed. Tuesday was a Chagah, the offices were closed. But a cable, a telegram came from Moscow that you're free to go home. That you're free to go home. But you're going to have to wait till tomorrow morning to get the official word. So of course the Frierdiker Rebbe went home and he told the few people who were with him that they're free to go home. The Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka, our Rebbetzin Chaya Mushka used to say that the Frierdiker Rebbe told her to send a telegram to Peterburg, Mevedayna the Haim of Shabbos, we're going to be home for Shabbos, Beli Pirsim, but don't tell anybody. It should be a secret. The Rebbe didn't want people to know about it. Anyway, so Wednesday he went into the office, they gave him the official walking papers, and the Frierdiker Rebbe left, the Frierdiker Rebbe came home. The Hemshech HaSipur, what happened next, is basically this. And this is how I understand it. And other people, it's not clear 100%, but this is why I understand it. The Frierdiker Rebbe realized that he now became the biggest obstacle to the continuation of the work. Why? Because the Frierdiker Rebbe was a nerve center. He was the base, and everybody was involved with him. And as a consequence of this, the Russian government realized that the Frierdiker Rebbe is an untouchable. They can't touch him. But they could arrest and harass anybody who came next to him. So the Frierdiker Rebbe realized that they just turned the prison inside out. The only person in Russia that's free is the Frierdiker Rebbe. Anybody who interacted with the Frierdiker Rebbe went to jail. So the Frierdiker Rebbe understood that the centralized model of organization, which had existed for those few years, had to be disbanded and replaced what they call today lahavdil in the terrorist culture, cells, individual cells. In other words, every packet, every group of Hasidim should be doing their own thing, and they should be separated, and they should know about one another, so that this way, if one person gets into trouble, the other guy is not going to get into trouble. You're going to have to mute yourself, if that's okay. Okay, yeah, you have to mute yourself, Rebbetzin. Whoever's in charge of the muting, b'vakasha l'mute. Thank you. Anyway, so the Frierdiker Rebbe disappeared from Leningrad, Peterburg. He hid out in Moscow all summer, agonizing, and he made the decision to leave Russia, to leave this country. And once he made the decision to leave Russia, then he made an announcement. Everybody could come for Tishrei. Following Tishrei, thousands of people came to see the Rebbe Rayatz, the Frierdiker Rebbe, for Tishrei Tafresh Peches. For many, many people, it was literally the only time they saw him. They would never seen him before. and they would never see him after. They just saw him that one time. It was a packed Tishrei, and then right after Tishrei, the Frierdiker Rebbe left, and he moved to Riga, Latvia. Then a few years later, he moved to Poland. Then, of course, he came to America, and of course, the rest is history. This is the brief version of Yud Beis Tammuz. It took me It took me a while, 35 minutes, yeah. But I overviewed a little bit the story of Yud Beis Tammuz. Now I want to tell you, Poshet stories of Mesiras Nefesh. I want to share a number of stories with you about the Mesiras Nefesh that Yidden had in Russia. The first story is really remarkable. It's a remarkable story. It's a mamash hamoidin dekamais. The story is this. In 1938, I think it was 38, and if it's not 38, it's 37, in the city of Berdichev, there was what they called a branch of Taim Chetmimim. A branch of Taim Chetmimim meant an attic of a shul that would allow the Bachim to hide there, and a teacher would teach them. How many Bachim were the whole yeshiva? 8 Bachim, 6 Bachim, a small little yeshiva there. And the Bachim lived in the attic, and the Balabatim didn't know they were there. It was very difficult to find a shul that would let them hang out, because the government would close the shul down if they found out that the Bachim were learning there, and so on. Anyway, they had a mashpia. His name was Moshe Rubinson. He was a big chassid, Moshe Rubinson. He was a Mendel Futterfass's brother-in-law. The Mendel Futterfass's wife was a Rubinson, the Moshe Rubinson. And he was their Rosh Yeshiva, he was their Madrich, he was their mashpia. And it was Chavdal Tevis. And the KGB came in and arrested him. So they arrested the 8 or 9 boys, they arrested the mashpia, and they arrested also the shamish of the shul, went with them to jail. Now there's a guy who's passed away now over 30 years. His name was Rabbi Yeshua Tzeitlin, Heschel Tzeitlin, Yeshua Tzeitlin. His son, who is now unfortunately also an El Mehmet, Adon Lezer, made a biography of his father. And in this book, they have the pictures from the KGB file. You see these kids who were arrested and put in jail. They were so little. They were 13, 12, 14-year-old boys. And they put them in jail, like criminals. And amongst them were people that you knew. Chatzkel Brod, Voloshansky. I mean, the household names in Lubavitch were children in that cheder at that time. And they sent them to jail. After some time in jail, they were put in an orphanage. They were put in an orphanage. And the idea was that since their parents were negligent in their education, they were not going to the regular schools, so they would put them into a reform school where the government would raise them. And they had to be smuggled out of this cheder and had to be hidden away. A long story, how they got hold of those kids. But this is all the prelude to the story. This is the preface to the mice. The end of the story is this. There were 7 or 8 boys in that group. And we know who they are. Most of them came out of Russia. Heschel Tzeitlin and Chatzkel Brod and Voloshansky and Overbach and a few others. I mean, we know who these people were. One of the boys in the group was Pevsner. He was killed by the Nazis, Yimach Shema. Killed by the Nazis. One of these 8 boys was named Rafal Brook. Rafal Brook. This Rafal Brook disappeared off the face of the earth. He was 14, not from a Chabad family. His parents had to be begged and promised that everything would be fine to let him learn in the yeshiva. The kid ended up in jail. And then Michal Teitelbaum had to sneak him out of the prison and bring him back home alive before his father would shoot him. And the man disappears off the face of the earth like he never existed. You fast forward more than 50 years. More than 50 years. It's 1991. This story happened in 1938 or 37. Fast forward 1991. Adon Lezer Tzeitlin, Heschel Tzeitlin's son, in other words, the son of one of those boys who was arrested in 1938, was in Moscow. While he was in Moscow, there's a shul called Maran Rosh Shul. Now it's a big palace. Then it was a little dingy shul. Not so little, but it was old. The phone rings. So Adon Lezer Tzeitlin picks up the phone. Coincidentally, he just happened to pick up the phone. And he hears from the other side of the phone, Doret Rafal Brook. This is Rafal Brook. And I heard that in Maran Rosh you could get a Chassidish kapara. That's what he said. I heard that in Maran Rosh you can get a Chassidish kapara. Rafal Brook was living deep in Russia his whole life. And he learned in Temchet Mimim when he was 14 years old. Not only did he remain frum, he had a beard. And in the city where he lived, which was deep in the interior of Russia, he was the Sheikhet and he was the Moyel, he was the Mesadeh Kedushnu, he was the Mesadeh Gittin. You know, from cradle to grave, he was the whole Yiddishkeit for many, many Yidden. And he was not the Lubavitcher boy. He learned it as a child. And his entire life was a life of Mesiras Nefesh because of the little bit of time that he learned the Temchim in the Radishev. So, why did he call? Why did he call? They had a Sheikhet. But his Sheikhet was a Misnagid. This was, he wanted a Hasidic kapara. He wanted to get a Hasidic for kaparas, for Yom Kippur. This was what was on his mind. You know? He's an old Jew living in Russia all the years through Stalin and through Khrushchev and through Brezhnev and through all the others. Yeah, and what did he want? What was on his mind? A Hasidic kapara. If it says that the Sheikhet who shechs his chicken out of Yom Kippur when he does Zechal Ifasi should be a Chassid. So Adam Lazer says, wait a minute. Adam Lazer says to him, you're the Fall Brook? My name is Tzeitlin. So the Fall Brook says, you're Heschel Tzeitlin's son? He says, yeah. And they became immediately, he treated him like he was his nephew with so much love. And he had to give him the bad news that his father had already passed. Heschel Tzeitlin passed away in 1988. He didn't have such a Arichas Yamim. Nor did his son, unfortunately. This was the koyach. This is the story. What happened was in 1991 they made a Kinus HaShluchim in Moscow, and they flew him in from wherever he lived, and he sat. There's pictures with a whole group of the Anash, all the Chassidim, the Shluchim, and then there were not nearly as many then as there are now, of course, who were doing the Rebbe's work in Moscow, and they were planning to send him to the Rebbe. There was a plan to fly him to the Rebbe, and unfortunately he passed away before he was able to make that trip. And some people said that it was the emotions, the excitement of possibly seeing the Rebbe. Pasha was too much for his heart. But this was the koyach of Temchet Mimim. This is what went on in Russia. They raised little kids, and the whole thing was so ad hoc. They didn't have normal yeshivas with classrooms and with blackboards. They learned in the underground, and the learning was so hard, and it was so dangerous. And every place they were learning someplace else. And they were running for their lives. They didn't always have food. But they created a generation of people who were ready for Mesiras Nefesh. I mean, that was the Matthias. And this young boy, not from a Chabad home, got in Temchet Mimim a spirit, an inspiration that defined his entire life. And it's impossible to know. There's no way to know how many Jews retained their identity as a Jew because of this boy, the Fall Brook. This is the first story that I wanted to share. Now I want to tell you a second story. This happened much later. It happened in 1966 or 67, in the mid-60s. There was a Yid who lived in Montreal, who was one of the greatest Go'onim of the post-Holocaust era, one of the greatest geniuses in Torah after the Holocaust, and his name was Harav Hirschbrunn, Pinchas Hirschbrunn. He was the chief rabbi of Montreal. He was a Polish Chassid who came from the Yeshivas Chacham in Poland. And he was very close to the Rebbe. He was incredibly close to the Rebbe. So he contacted the Rebbe around 1966 with the following question. Romania had a revolution in 1956. Romania became communist in 1956. As did many countries, Czechoslovakia and so on. Romania was one of the worst communist dictatorships. It was a couple. It was him and her, Ceausescu. They ran the country with an iron fist. And for those of us who are old enough to remember, I remember when they shot him in the street like dogs. The people rose up against him. They literally shot them in the street like Mussolini was killed, mamish, like dogs. And they ran Romania with an iron fist for decades, from 1956 until 1989. Yeah, 66, 76, 86. More than 30 years. Anyway, the government of Romania wanted to make a good impression on the West. So they invited a group of American rabbis, American and Canadian rabbis, to visit Romania, that they should see, as they would put it, there's no religious persecution. So Rabbi Hirschbrunn asked the Rebbe if he should go. So the Rebbe told him the following. He said, you should absolutely go. He said, but you have to know something. Every Gabbai is an agent of the government. In other words, you can't trust anybody. When you get there, the entire trip is going to be choreographed. They're going to show you the Romania they want you to see. The real Jews, the real suffering, the real persecution that the Jewish people in Romania are experiencing, they're not going to let you see. They're going to let you see only what they want you to see. But the Rebbe says, if you'll be smart and you'll be careful, you will find ways to interface, to meet real Jews in Romania, and give them things, or give them hashpah, and so forth, and so on. 46? Okay, you know better. I thought it was 56. Okay, 46. No, are you sure 46? You went to Goin Harav Google, and he told you 46? Okay, I'm sure you know better. After the class, I'm going to cheat. I'm going to look. I'm not trusting you on this one. Okay, anyway. Okay. So Rabbi Hirschberg went to Romania. And by the way, the chief rabbi of Romania, his name was Rabbi Rosen, had a personal connection with the Rebbe. He visited America. He visited the Rebbe a few times. The Rebbe spent a lot of time with him. Who was a frum Jew. He was a real frum Jew. In the entire years of the Romanian communist regime, they printed one original book in Hebrew. And you know what it was? It wasn't a Siddur. It was a Tanya. The only book printed in the entire duration of the Romanian communist regime was Rabbi Rosen got them to print the Tanya by the Rebbe's request. That's pretty interesting. Anyway, so he came to Romania, and of course, everything was very carefully controlled. They only saw the Jews they wanted them to see, and the shows they wanted them to see, and the issues. It was very controlled. And then they visited other cities, and wherever they went, they were accompanied by a Gabbai, and of course the Gabbai was an agent of the government, and everybody knew the game. Everyone was playing their part. But occasionally there'd be an opportunity to have a real word with a real Jew and Dorach Reden. Anyway, one of the cities that Harav Hirschsprung visited, he met a Hasidish Yid. That means a Yid who was old-fashioned Hasidus. He had a full beard, a payas. He was wearing a kapata, a long kaftan, a long coat. His wife was wearing a sheitel with a hat on top of the sheitel, very Hasidish, like it's in many, many other cultures. And the children of this couple looked like they were born in Jerusalem. It's the kind of the Ramish Hasidish kids in the middle of a spiritual desert like you never saw. And Rabbi Hirschman couldn't believe it. And this man says to Rabbi Hirschman, he says, I know that after you leave Romania, you're going to go back to the States. And I need to ask you a favor, he says, I have lived in this city since the revolution. I have lived in this city where he was, whichever city it was in Romania, since the revolution. And I'm everything. I am the moil, and I'm the one who cuts the hair for the upshadiness, and I teach them olive bays, and I prepare them for bar mitzvah, I prepare them for their weddings, and the Masada Kedushin, and when need be, unfortunately, I'm a Masada de Gitten, and I make the bris on their children, and then when after 120 I bury them. I'm everything. But now I'm married with children. My children have zero friends. They have no companionship whatsoever. And like Yankov Avinu said to Lavan Arami, Mosai ese gamanoichi levesi. I have a right to think about my children. I need to get out of Romania. And he says there's no way out of this country. This country is like the city of Jericho. You understand? It's locked. Segeres, and you can't get anything out. So he says to Rabbi Hirschsprung, there's only one Jew in the world who can help me. And that's the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He knew that, the Lubavitcher Rebbe. How he knew that, I don't know. He said, when you go back to the West, please go see the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Tell him about me. Tell him what I've been doing all this time. And tell him that now I have to leave. Not for me, for my children. So Rabbi Hirschsprung returns to New York, and he makes an appointment to go see the Rebbe. And the Rebbe asked him 1,001 questions. The Rebbe asked him so many questions about individual people in Romania. And of course, we all know that the Rebbe knew by name and by face many of the principles of the underground all over the Eastern Bloc. Nobody knows how. But the Rebbe had thousands of personal connections to many of these Jews, and it was so clandestine, it was so secret, nobody knew about it. And the Rebbe asked him questions for hours. When the Rebbe was done asking him questions, then he said to the Rebbe, now I have requests. People ask me certain things that I should mention to the Rebbe, and I want to go through this list. And of course the Rebbe said, sure, go through the list. So he told the Rebbe about this chassid that he met in some city in Romania. He says, this man is an incredible Jew. He's a chassidish Yid. His wife is so ehrlich, and their children are so chassidish. And he told me that he's the Ruach HaChaim, he's the Yiddishkeit in this area single-handedly. But he feels like he has a right to put his children first. And he's asking Rabbi Hirschsprung to ask the Rebbe that the Rebbe should do what he needs to do to help him leave Romania and go to Eretz Yisrael. Now I want to just interrupt the story. Rabbi Hirschsprung knew the Rebbe well. Rabbi Hirschsprung had visited the Rebbe on many occasions, and they talked about many things. Rabbi Hirschsprung realized just how great the Rebbe was in Torah and in leadership and all the other ways that the Rebbe is Rebbe. But on this one occasion, when he shared this with the Rebbe, and he asked the Rebbe to help this man leave Romania, the Rebbe became very serious. And the Rebbe said to him the following. I spoke to him in Yiddish, I'll say it in English. He said to him, if he leaves, who's going to do the brisn? And who's going to do the abshernis? And who's going to make the bar mitzvah? Who's going to make the chasana? And who's going to make the levaya? And who's going to teach children alphabets? Nobody. There's nobody to replace. And then the Rebbe says to him very emotionally, the Rebbe, the Schwer, vielleicht schicken Yidden in Azelchat was. The Friedrich Rebbe used to send Jews into such environments, implying I don't send people in. But he said to Rabbi Hirschsprung, wie kannst du mir beten, als ich soll helfen herausfahren? How could you even ask me that I should help him leave? What's going to be with the Jews? And Rabbi Hirschsprung told over the story. He didn't tell the story one time, he told the story 100 times. And Rabbi Hirschsprung would say, it wasn't until that moment that I met the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He didn't appreciate the burden, the responsibility that Rebbe carries until that instant. When the Rebbe said to him, a Yid is in Russia, and he's Mekar Yidin Layish Bashamayim, he has to stay there. He's necessary there, he's needed there, and you can't just jump ship, save yourself, and abandon all the Jews. Rabbi Hirschsprung said, I didn't understand the responsibility that the Rebbe carries on his shoulders until that moment. And this was this is the Rabbeim, and this is really Yud Beis Tamuz, the idea of Mesiras Nefesh, the Mesiras Nefesh for Yidden, Mesiras Nefesh for Yiddishkeit, which of course the Friedrich Rebbe did with an incredible reckless abandon. Our Rebbe was much more diplomatic. The Friedrich Rebbe also was very careful, but that was very diplomatic. But there was an understanding that Yiddishkeit, you have to do everything in your power to save Yiddishkeit, even if there's poshut on need for Mesiras Nefesh. This is the story of Beis Tamuz. The story of Yud Beis Tamuz is a story of Mesiras Nefesh. It's a story of Mesiras Nefesh. And like I said before, there's so many stories that you could tell that reflect the circumstance and the demands of the Rabbeim, the Friedrich Rebbe, the Rebbe in Soviet Russia, the Marshal. The Friedrich Rebbe had a Farbrengen once in 1927. And he was talking about chinuch, about children, and about teaching little kinderlach, alabes. And the Friedrich Rebbe turned to one of the greatest chassidim, the Bitcher de Maslet, who was a really great chassid. And he said, Itche, Eib du lernst Teire mit Tashpar bist du meine. Oib nicht bist du Take Itche, aber meine bist du nicht. The Friedrich Rebbe said to Itche de Maslet, if you'll teach Teire to little children, you're mine. Otherwise, you're Take Itche, and Itche had great milas, but you're not mine. My inyan, the Rebbe said, was that little children should learn Teire and Alabez. So at one of these Farbrengen, the Friedrich Rebbe was talking about Mesiras Nefesh and so on. And one of the Chassidim at the Farbrengen said to the Friedrich Rebbe, what should I do? The Rebbe is talking about Mesiras Nefesh. Tell me what to do. So the Frierdiker Rebbe pointed to his office that I'll talk to him in private after the Farbrengen. Anyway, after the Farbrengen, this chassid went into the Frierdiker Rebbe, and the Frierdiker Rebbe told him the following: you should go back to your town, und du sollst fasten 3 Tage b'Hafsaka. You should fast for 3 days, eating at night. Fast 3 days and eating at night. Und danach sollst du aufgehen auf ein Bimme, und du sollst sagen, was bei dir auf ein Herzen. This is Yiddish, he says. After you fast for 3 days, go into shul, go onto the Bimme, bang on the Bimme, and say what's in your heart. And what do you think was in his heart? What was in his heart was all the people who stopped coming to shul. What was in his heart was all the people, Rahman al-Islam, were not keeping Shabbos. And the worst of all, the worst sin of all, which is arguably not even a sin, but it brings to more sins than any other sin, sending their children to the government schools where they were poisoned against the Eibishter and against Teda and against mitzvahs. Because the government said if you don't send the children to the official schools, they'll take your children away from you. And the only way to be a frum Yid in Russia was to be prepared for Mesiras Nefesh, to do it without any cheshbonis. So the Rebbe said to him, go up on the Bimah, fast 3 days, go up on the Bimah and say what you're feeling. And he got up on the Bimah and he banged on the Bimah and he said, listen people, this is the situation and this is how you deal with it. This is how you deal with it. With an incredible Mesiras Nefesh. I'll tell you some more stories. of Mesiras Nefesh. This is a very interesting story, the following, so it's a fascinating story. I heard this story from a neighbor of mine who is unfortunate now in Olam HaEmes. His name was Reb Shmuel Mochkin. He was the oldest of the Mochkin brothers. Mullah Mochkin was his name. Mullah Mochkin. Shmuel Mochkin. He was my neighbor, and it was a while that he wasn't well, so I used to go and visit him, and he would talk to me, tell me stories. So he told me an interesting story. First of all, the Mochkin brothers got out of Russia in the 60s. They were literally part of the exchange for spies. The West and the East used to exchange spies. So in one of these exchanges, the two Mochkin brothers were traded for some kind of a Russian spy that was in Canada. The Canadian government got them out of Russia, which is why when they left Russia, they couldn't come to the Rebbe right away. They had to go to Canada, and then they get permission, special visas, to be able to come and see the Rebbe. So Shmuel Mochkin told me that before, this is what he told me, and once I repeated the story, and people started screaming at me that the story can't be true, but I heard it from him. That's true. Whether it's true or not, I don't know, but I heard it from him. That when he was leaving Russia, all the Lubavitcher Hasidim gave him messages to pass along to the Rebbe. And he had notebooks full of messages. I guess they were written in code that he understood. He took these notebooks with him from Russia, and he waited for an opportunity to come to the United States to go into the Rebbe. I heard once that the Rebbe said to his parents, he says, the Kinderayre, your children don't seem to be in a rush to come to see me. They were living in Canada, and they had a hard time getting a visa. And the Rebbe says, but I'm anxious to see them. The Rebbe said, I'm anxious to see them. I want to see them. I want to meet them. Anyway, the father got permission from the Canadian government. He told me, Mullah Mochkin told me, that one of his disappointments was that one of the people who was very instrumental in helping them leave Russia was Bobby Kennedy, the president's brother, Robert Kennedy, who was the Attorney General for a while, and then he ran for president in 1968, and he was murdered. Robert Kennedy was killed. He says, we were looking forward to go meeting him and telling him a personal thank you. By the time we came to the United States, he had already been killed. They missed the chance. So anyway, they came to the Rebbe, him and his brother, Yossel, who's also in Olam HaEmes. And he told the Rebbe that he has hundreds of messages from Hasidim. So of course, you know the Rebbe's schedule. The Rebbe met people at night, 8 o'clock at night was Yechidus. The Rebbe says to Mullah Mochkin, you come anytime you want. Come in the afternoon. Not at night, come in the afternoon. Go into the secretary and they'll let you in. So he told me I would come to Rabbi Klein. Rabbi Klein would start cursing under his breath. Because he knew how costly it was that someone went into the Rebbe in the middle of the day. That's what the Rebbe said. He would come with his notebooks of his, and he would go into the Rebbe and he would read requests for brachas, and the Rebbe would answer. Some of these answers he had to contact people in Russia, however he did it to give them the answer, and others were simply requests for brachas. One of the people on his list was a chassid whose name I'm not going to say, because last time I said a name I got screamed at, so he will remain nameless. lived in Samarkand, I think. And he had a bunch of kids, 6, 7, 8 kids. And they never went for a day to the Treifa schools. They didn't go for one day to the Soviet schools that were full of kfira and apocryphals. Huh? And the government was tightening the screws. They kept on telling him that sooner or later they're going to take his children from him. I want you to know that I heard from Hillel Zaltzman, that under Stalin, if you didn't cooperate, they would either kill you or put you in jail. Under Khrushchev and under Brezhnev, they would threaten you. They didn't really carry it out. And for 20 years, the Soviet Union kept people in check from fear. In other words, Stalin had died in 1953, 52, 53, and for 20 years after his death, there were people afraid that he's going to come and kill you. But they weren't really shooting people anymore. In other words, it was not as dangerous, but it was still incredibly dangerous. And most importantly, you were off balance. You were always afraid. A kid said, so this guy says to Mullah Muchkin, you're going to go out of Russia, you're going to go see the Rebbe. Ask the Rebbe what I should do. They're threatening to take my children. Should I send them to the Shkola or should I not send them? Should I send them to the Goyish schools or not? So Rabbi Muchkin came to New York after a while. It took him a while to get from Canada into America. And he went in to see the Rebbe. The first note that he handed the Rebbe was this request. The first note was a whole stack. The first note he handed the Rebbe was this request that so-and-so is asking what he should do with his children. The Rebbe read the note and he put it to the bottom of the pile and didn't answer it. And the Rebbe answered a whole bunch more. And he didn't understand why the Rebbe didn't answer. The next day he came again in the afternoon, and again Benjamin Klein was muttering all kinds of unspeakables under his breath to bother the Rebbe in the middle of the afternoon. And he went into the Rebbe again and he read more. And he also he put that note on top of the pile and put it to the bottom of the pile. After a few days, he gets a phone call from Russia. This chassid took a risk. And he said, phone call, the only place where you had a phone internationally was in the post office. And you had to order it in advance. And of course the KGB was listening in. And he says, I don't understand you. You're by Dedeshku, you're by the Zayda. I asked you a question of life and death. How come you don't have an answer? So he tells him every single day, I put it to the top of the pile, and every single day he ignores it and puts it to the bottom of the pile. He says, I must have an answer. I must have an answer. He says, okay, I'll do it again. The next day, again, I heard the story from him myself. This is not Mipi Ashmua. I heard directly from him. He went into the Rebbe, and the first letter on top of the pile was this request: what should this chassid do with his children? Should he send them to the shkola or should he risk losing his children? The Rebbe takes the letter, puts it to the bottom of the pile. So Mullah Muchkin told me, I got the chutzpah to say to the Rebbe, excuse me, Rebbe, I need an answer for this one. You can't ignore. He called me and he's upset. He feels very precarious, very unsure. His children are at risk of being taken from their parents. Should he send them to the Goyish school? Should he not? I need a straight answer from the Rebbe. So the Rebbe says to Mullah Muchkin, Bazeh Aloshim, Du sag mir, was ich soll sagen. You're asking me for an answer? You're wondering why I'm not answering? You know what? Tell me what I should tell him and I'll tell him. How can I answer such a question? I should tell him, yeah. I should tell him he should send the kids to the guy. I can't do that. I should tell him no. I should tell him that he should risk losing his children. I can't do that either. So I said to him, you tell me what to say and I'll tell you. So Mullah Muchkin told me the end of the story was, within weeks, they were out of Russia. The Rebbe would not endorse their sending the children to the Goyish schools. He would not endorse not sending to the Goyish schools, but he made other arrangements. Within weeks, that mishpacha left Russia. This was the life that the Frierdiker Rebbe demanded. One more story, and then I'll sort of try to make a point. Yeah, Farbrengens is supposed to have a point. The stories are the best part. That's the part that most people stay awake for. Yeah, one more story. One more story. This is in Hilke. Yes, sir.
Rabbi, I apologize for interrupting. I'm Avram's student, and I just have a quick question.
Avram who?
Avram from the center.
Okay, I don't know what that is, but okay, Shalom Aleichem.
He's in the Zoom right now. Okay, thank you. I just have a quick question. I really want you to give me the quickest answer possible, and the realest answer possible. Who wrote the Talmud and why?
Whoa!
Yes, I know it's
I'm not
I know
answering
it's
you right now. This is a little bit disconnected. Um,
just a quick, 30-second
no, no,
answer.
no, no. When it's over, it's not fair. There's 70 people here. Your name is iPhone, so there's no issue. Your name on my screen is iPhone, so I don't know who iPhone is. I got a bunch of iPhones. When I'm done, I'll try to answer you. But this is Shalom Aleichem. It's nice to meet you. Hello, welcome. One thing at a time. Hilke Zalfman has a story in his Sefer. Hillel Zalfman has a story in his book. By the way, the name of his book is Samarkand, and of course, the most important thing you have to remember from tonight's Zoom is inside Chassidus.org. You got to visit inside Chassidus.org. And the second most important thing is, if you get a hold of the book Samarkand, it's in Hebrew and in Yiddish and in English and in Russian. It's really a very important read because it's not a story about the Tmimim. It's a story about the children of the Tmimim. It's not a story about the Chassidim who learned in Lubavitch. It's a story about their children, the next generation. And they were people. They were not angels. They were people. Like you and me. Their parents were angels. They were people. And the Mesiras Nefesh that they had is also very, very remarkable. So Hilke has a Zamaise. That there was a Yid who lived in Samarkand whose name was Cohen. He lived now in Crown Heights. I never met him. But I'm always telling the story. Because the story to me is, it's mamish hafla of a fella. If you had children in Russia, you didn't force them to do anything. You educated them. But if a kid was registered in school and it came Shabbos and he said, I'm going to school, you didn't tell him no. It wasn't that you didn't have the power to stop them. You didn't have the right. Because if they didn't go to school Shabbos, you know what happened to them on Monday? They'd be humiliated, they'd be put down, they'd be made fun of, they'd put them up on the stage and the whole school would call them subotnikis, you understand? Children had to really choose it. So this kid, Cohen, I forgot his first name, was 14. He wasn't even from a Lubavitcher home, he was from a Gruziner, from a Bukharian home. And this is how he writes the story. He made the decision that he's keeping Shabbos metanemes. He's really keeping Shabbos. Really keeping Shabbos means he's not going to carry his book back to school, and he's not going to write. It doesn't mean he's not going to go to school, but he's not going to write. And of course, if you know the history, when it came to Shabbos, even the kids who went to school, every Shabbos they got sick. They had another reason why they didn't go. And the people in the school, some of them were so vicious, especially the Jews, who knew that they're staying home because of Shabbos, and they would torture them. So one day there was a test, a very important exam on Saturday. So he had to go to the exam. And he came with his whole face wrapped up, full of bandages. He says, I have a terrible, terrible toothache. I had to come to school because I wouldn't come to school, then I would fail the exam. But I cannot do the test. I'm in so much pain. I'll have to do it the next day. His teacher said to him, there's a tooth that hurts you? We'll go down to the infirmary. In the school there was an infirmary. And we'll pull out the tooth. So he says to this teacher, my mother is a dentist. And that was the truth. My mother is a dentist. She'll pull out the tooth. But I don't want to go to the infirmary to a strange person. And the teacher says, if you're not taking this exam, the cost for not taking it, she knew why he wasn't taking the exam. We're going to pull the tooth. And he tried to reason with her. He says, my mother is a dentist. No, if you're not taking the exam, we're pulling the tooth. Anyway, she schlepped him down to the basement. And the woman who was in charge of the infirmary asked him which tooth hurts. And none of his teeth hurt. He didn't. So he identified a tooth, and they pulled the tooth with no painkillers. She pulled that tooth out of his mouth without any pain. You know what that means? They pulled the tooth out of his mouth. A 14-year-old boy. A 14-year-old boy. Because in quotes, he decided to keep Shabbos metanemes. This is what life was like in Russia. Now, I think to myself, that Jew lives in Crown Heights, the same Crown Heights I live in. He walks in the same streets, and he sends his children to the same schools. We have nothing in common We have nothing in common with the Yidden who came from Russia. The Mesiras Nefesh that they had makes them supermen, mamish, not normal people. The Mesiras Nefesh was extraordinary. But I just want to finish with this point and sort of end the Farbrengen with this Nekuda. As when the Rebbe, I told you before that when the Frierdiker was 15, his father took him to an Akedah, and he told him that he's making him a covenant, that he should be Mesiras Nefesh for the Jewish people. And he asked him if he knows what Mesiras Nefesh means. So the Frierdiker Rebbe said he didn't know what Mesiras Nefesh means. So his father said to him, Mesiras Nefesh means Azoya Nitandish. Mesiras Nefesh means this way and no other. Rabbi said the Mesiras Nefesh that the Frierdiker Rebbe warranted and demanded and lived, we have no connection to. But we live in America. And America has a different test and a different Mesiras Nefesh. The Rebbe said that the test of America is al yevash mipnei amaligim, not to be embarrassed to be different. You know, America is a very inviting country. America is incredibly good to Jews. Jews haven't had this good since the second Beis Hamikdash stood. But Americans want to be like everybody else. And a Jew knows that his values are Jewish values. And you don't half-half. You don't say, I'll be as Jewish as America allows me to be. There's no America. And this test, to build our homes, and to raise our children, and to live our lives based on the principles of Torah Tmima, Yiddishkeit, and nothing else, is our test. The idea that we don't take lessons, or ideas, or philosophy, or values from the world around us. We take our directions, take our dictation from the Torah, and from the Rebbe, and from Hasidus only. This is our Mesiras Nefesh. And many of us, some of us, one of us, occasionally thinks that it would be nice if I could be more like my neighbor, or more like the person whose picture I see in the newspaper, or whose pictures I see in the magazines, like a Yetzeh. And the message of your Beis Tamuz, the message of Azoyu Nisht Andish, this way and no other way, is this: that our value system, our philosophy of life is strictly Torah. I want you to know that the Rebbe once said to someone in Yechidus, the Rebbe was in Yechidus, in private Yechidus, said to him like this, that my father-in-law, the Frierdiker Rebbe, wanted America to be a Mokum Torah. He wanted America to be a place of Torah. And the meaning of that statement, he wanted America to be a place of Torah, was that America should be like the old country was. What was the old country? They were Jews, that's it. They had no other interest of being Jewish. They lived in Russia, they lived in Poland, lived in Hungary, they lived in wherever they lived. They were Jews through and through, start to finish, and everything in between. That was their whole identity. There was Torah in America. People learned Torah. But even the people learned Torah in America, the way they learned Torah, the way they practiced Yiddishkeit it was very important for them to be American. And the Rebbe wanted Jews, period. And the Rebbe said, my father-in-law worked very hard that in America there should be Yidden whose whole mitzvah is Yiddishkeit, but during his physical lifetime he never merited to see it. And the Rebbe says, but I do merit to see Yidden whose only consideration in their life is to serve Hashem. And this is your Beis Tamuz. This is real, the Yom Tov of your Beis Tamuz. So I'm going to finish with the Chaim, with the Bracha. Koidem kol darf man wissen azoi. That's a Chassidische Farbrengen. And a Chassidische Farbrengen can man aufmachen in jede Sach, right? It says in the back of the Tilim, in the name of the Baal Shem Tov, the Alter Rebbe repeated it. Was a Chassidische Farbrengen can uftan kel mechol, soren shayisol nicht uftan. What a Chassidic Farbrengen can achieve in Malach Mechol, who's our official representative Lamaila, cannot accomplish, because there's a Farbreng. And amongst the participants in the Farbrengen, there's Achdos, there's Ava V'Yachva. So when one of us is asking the Eibishter for something, we're all asking together with him. And when the Eibishter sees unity, tzivishn his kinderlach, amongst his children, he becomes weak at the knees. The Eibishter has a weakness. It says in Sfarim, the Eibishter has one weakness. The only weakness the Eibishter has is peace, shalom. And when between us there's shalom, the koyach is unbelievable. So we should use this opportunity to bet in the Eibishter for alle brachas. Koydem kol, Mashiach Tzidkeinu, b'pei teva nira v'nigla, l'mata masara tvachim. Instead of Farbrengen about all these holy things, it'll be B'Poel Mamish, Beis Galus. I just saw now a Sikha that the Rebbe Rashab, someone on Farbrengen mentioned that Mashiach's coming, so the Rebbe Rashab said, when Mashiach comes, it'll be good. Wird reden, und mir werden alle hören. He'll talk, and we'll all keep quiet and listen. And in addition to that, Maybe should bless us all with all the things we need, with help, with Parnasa Bar Chava, and gesunde Yiddische Kinder, and gesunde Kinder, and Frumme Kinder, and Chassidische Kinder, and good health, full health, and Shalom Bayis, and all the other brachas that a Yid needs, individually and in his family and his community, and we should be. I always tanzim in the bitter and goals against the Gula Shleimer take from a Yad Mamish. All of us together. The Rebbe said once Mashiach's going to come, everybody's going to go to his Rebbe. Even though Mashiach is going to be the teacher of teachers, at the same time, every generation of Jews is going to go to his Rebbe. And we're going to go and stand with our Rebbe. L'chaim b'lebracha. L'chaim. L'chaim.
L'chaim. Thank you very much, Rabbi Paltiel.
Can I answer that iPhone's question? Do we have 30?
Send another time. I'll have him reach out to you.
Okay, give him my phone number. Give him time to a voice note on WhatsApp.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, okay.